Cool. Let me give it a retweet there. Cool.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here today. Everyone's been here before except you, right? Anyone else here the first time? Yeah. All right, welcome. So this is Ethereum Vancouver. Today we have this really smart guy named Owen talking to us about rollups and sequencers. Pretty exciting stuff. Before we dive into that, is there any like events going on? Still doing the Nouns Running Club? Is that a thing?
No, we're kind of slowing that down.
That's all right. End of summer. It's a summertime thing,
Yeah.
right? All right. That's all good. We're here every Thursday, so if you have fun tonight, come back again sometime. I just wanted to say like a couple things before we get started. Got some like sad news to share. Sorry to like bring the mood down, but I think it's important to bring this up. So we had a one wonderful member of our community, Julia Love, pass away recently. So really sad. I didn't know her nearly as well as I would have liked to, and unfortunately, like won't get the chance to do that now. Her partner Gary made a post that I thought I would just read like a few like portions of, just just want to like honor her memory a little bit. So it's with great sorrow that I share some tragic news. Several days ago, Julia Love, beloved mother, daughter, sister, friend, leader, and visionary, departed this earth. As all who knew Julia can attest, she was an unforgettable human being, or perhaps a supernova in human form, here to burn far brighter than most would believe possible. And that's probably like all I'll say about it. If any of you like knew her better than I did, really sorry about that. Anybody listening at home, just our deepest condolences. Really sucks to have that happen to like somebody like so close. She was like such a like powerful force in the community. Did a lot for like the scene in Vancouver. Loved Dogecoin a lot.
Yeah.
And just call your mom and tell your lover. Hug your friends. Don't leave anything like unsaid. If life is short and all that. So anyway.
Yeah.
With that being said, let's talk about sequencers.
Well, Julia loved open source, decentralized technology. So
yes, exactly, and hence
we can
decentralized and sequencer. All right. Thanks for that, everybody. And now let's let Owen talk to us about rollups and such. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I kind of titled my talk, hopefully to be a little bit surprising or unexpected. But what's the issue with rollups? Right now, we kind of have an issue and not many people talk about it. But in my opinion, the biggest issue is kind of decentralizing the sequencer. So are rollups really decentralized? And the answer is just no. Like most rollups rely on a centralized sequencer to order and submit transactions, which is just kind of goes against the decentralized notion that this technology should strive to be. So first of all, what is a sequencer? So you have a layer 2. I'm sure most of you are familiar with how layer 2 works, but this is kind of a bit of a diagram that should tell you a bit more about that. So a user submits a transaction to the transaction mempool, and this is like a layer 1, like there's a mempool of transactions that are waiting to be put into a block. And so with L2, usually the sequencer will pick those transactions, order them, and post them on layer 1. And this is like usually a permissioned process, like let's say Arbitrum runs their sequencer. So they get to decide the order of the transactions, we're kind of trusting that they order it fairly, and they just decide when to post that to the rollup, or to the rollup contract on layer 1. So there is kind of a few issues with this. First of all, the sequencer is centralized, so it can go down. And then, like I said, we're trusting that they kind of order those transactions properly. They don't censor these transactions. And there's a lot of trust placed in this sequencer. But why is it centralized usually? And I feel like these aren't the best reasons. Speed, which of course is a good reason for L2s. You want L2s to be very fast. If you're just submitting to a single sequencer, it doesn't have to go through a network and find its way to the layer 1 contract. So a lot of projects choose to use centralized sequencers for speed. And then also simplicity. Like, it is quite a difficult problem to create a decentralized sequencer. So for now, a lot of projects are going with a centralized sequencer with plans to decentralize in the future. Not too many are necessarily vocal about like what they're trying to do right now, but there are a few. And so we'll kind of take a look at that throughout this process. But a lot of these projects like Arbitrum, and I believe Optimism has this option as well, is like, okay, right now, if the sequencer goes down, what can you do? And the solution for that is, okay. Instead of previously, we have this, it goes through the sequencer. The user can just submit directly to the rollup contract, but there is like a time period. So the sequencer has to be down for 5 days before you can do this. It's not great. It's like a escape, or not escape hatch, but like a backup plan in case the sequencer does go down, is that you can still retrieve your funds. But you wouldn't use this most of the time. This is kind of only like a backup plan. So first of all, are there any questions about sequencers that maybe don't make sense, or any clarification? Do we have a, oh, sorry, yeah.
Are the mempools for rollups, are they usually public, or are the transactions directly sent to the sequencer?
I believe they're usually sent to the sequencer.
Okay. So there's no public mempool as such?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
Yeah. It might depend on the rollup. But yeah, what are the different solutions that we could do this? Like, we don't want a centralized sequencer. We want to have some sort of trustless way to submit these transactions. So what's the options here? So there's kind of 3 that are out there right now, or that I've seen. And the first one is just decentralizing it. Instead of taking one sequencer, you split it up into a bunch of them, and you randomly pick one, and that's going to be the one. Kind of like how Ethereum works right now, is like on the layer 1, one node gets chosen to be the block proposer. Yeah, and then there's based sequencing, and this is kind of like, it's pretty cool, because what you do instead of creating your own network of sequencers is you just push that to the L1 block proposer. The L1 block proposer does all of this work, essentially. And then there's another interesting one, which is a shared sequencer. And so you kind of combine a bunch of rollups. They all use one sequencer, and that sequencer will post all the blocks for those rollups. It's a little bit weird, but we'll kind of dive into each of these and explain them a little bit better. So the first one is a decentralized sequencer, and the main company that's doing this right now, or I'm not sure if it's live yet, but it's Metis. And so what they do is basically, let's just decentralize the sequencer. Take this single process, let anybody run it, or a permission set of people run it, and then choose who should be the proposer of the next block, the next L2 block. And then you have to have some mechanism for who's going to be the next sequencer, and Metis just chose to use Tendermint for this. It's a consensus protocol developed by Cosmos. And Tendermint uses deterministic selection. They use a weighted round-robin approach. That doesn't necessarily matter as much for sequencers, but it means that all nodes eventually get chosen to propose, and it rotates the proposer each round. So it's determined to be as sufficiently random process for Metis rollup. So that was pretty quick. Not too much information there, but essentially what we're doing is we're just taking this sequencer, splitting it into a bunch of sequencers, and then choosing one at random, using kind of some third-party logic, not necessarily using Ethereum's Ethereum system. And so that's kind of where base rollups switch that up, is that they actually use the L1, or yes, the L1 block proposer. But kind of looking back again at L2s, what are the layers of a rollup? You have an execution layer, so this is just the program that you're running that determines or executes a transaction and says, yes, this is a good transaction. And then we have a consensus layer, and this is essentially the sequencer. And the consensus would agree that like this is the order that these transactions should be in. Also, like, does this look right? It might be different whether it's OP or ZK stack. And then you have a data availability layer, and this is just like the rollup state. So we can look back at all of the transactions that happened, and we have that available somewhere so that we can check. And then we have the settlement layer, which is just posting that to L1. And with a ZK rollup, like you would verify it there. With the OP rollup, you have a different system there. But this is kind of like a little breakdown of what the different layers are. And we're mostly focusing on this consensus layer, which is the ordering of transactions. So with a base rollup, Justin Drake said rollup is said to be based or L1 sequenced when its sequencing is driven by the base L1. More concretely, a base rollup is one where the next L1 proposer may, in collaboration with L1 searchers and builders, permissionlessly include the next rollup block as part of the next L1 block. So rather than having these sequencers, we just say, hey, you're proposing the next L1 block, you should decide this order, and you can do this instead of having another network and everything. So we just kind of push it up the stack to L1. And so with a based rollup, we have these layers again. The settlement layer is on Ethereum. One can always access to the verified L2 state on Ethereum. Data availability layer, the data is on Ethereum, now usually in blobs. And anyone can check the posted block hash and retrieve the data about the transactions. And then with this consensus layer, we don't actually have a consensus layer. Instead, we use Ethereum's consensus layer as the transaction ordering is determined by the L1 validators. And we have this execution layer, which executes the transactions off-chain on its own. And so this is kind of with a base rollup. Tycho is really pushing heavy on this. I haven't seen many others doing this, but they may look into this. This is kind of where a lot of the Vitalik, Justin Drake, a lot of these people are kind of pushing towards this system, which makes more sense. You don't have to trust in this third-party randomness checker and another network of sequencers. It's a lot less kind of overhead on a network outside of Ethereum. You kind of just use what's already there. One thing I actually wasn't clear about here is how do we make sure that the next block proposer is going to be running this software that would sequence these transactions? I didn't know that. I don't know if anybody in the crowd knows this, but it was a little fuzzy there when I was doing some research. So if in a base rollup, if we're pushing all of this to the L1 proposer, if the L1 proposer isn't running this sequencing, does the block just not get published, or yeah?
I guess there are different ways to approach it. What's fundamentally important in base rollup idea is the set of L1 proposers have the right to propose the next rollup block as well, but they may choose to not participate, or something like you could imagine a world where only 30% of Ethereum block proposers are participating in this. So you just don't get a based rollup block on that Ethereum block, and that's one of the main drawbacks. Like maybe everybody is not participating.
Okay.
And another drawback is like for like other rollups, you get these blocks fast. For like for instance Arbitrum, you get every 300 milliseconds you get a block, but here you maybe need to wait at least one Ethereum block.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is also another design that lets anybody to like send a rollup like block every like Ethereum block. For instance, like you could have Ethereum slot where 3 different people send 3 consecutive blocks for Tyco, for instance.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah.
this is kind of tricky without like coordination, and I believe the current version of the Tyco just allows one like Tyco block per Ethereum block.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, then with the finality wouldn't necessarily be as fast as other rollups because you have to wait for the 15-second, 12-second block time on Ethereum. Okay. Any questions there? Because I'm kind of breezed through a bit. If not, I'll just keep going. Cool. So we've already covered 2 of them. One was just decentralizing. One is the base, where we kind of use layer 1 for this. And then we have a shared sequencer. And I think the shared sequencer is the most interesting. Might be the trickiest for adoption, but it does kind of create some interesting things here. So we'll take a look at kind of how this works. So with a shared sequencer, rather than each rollup having their own sequencer, we can just use one sequencer or a network of sequencers where users of all different rollups pass their transactions. So maybe we have an optimism transaction, we have an Arbitrum transaction, and we have a scroll transaction, and they all send it to the shared sequencer. And this shared sequencer then orders those transactions and sends it to the data availability layer and also to the layer 1. And so they would submit multiple blocks for multiple rollups, all from this one shared sequencer, which is kind of interesting because it adds some extra things here. But essentially, users submit transactions to any supported rollup to a single like mempool. Sequencers are chosen through a consensus mechanism, so could be like Tendermint, like Metis, could be another consensus mechanism to choose this sequencer. And then one sequencer submits the new blocks for each of the supported rollups. So like I said, it's kind of might be hard for adoption because everybody that uses this shared sequencer, like you have to have Arbitrum's participation, you have to have Optimism's participation, you have to get all of these layer 2s on board, and if you don't have those network effects, then maybe you just kind of die out. So it is kind of difficult there. There's actually a lot more that I didn't know about, but 2 of the main people doing this right now are Espresso Systems and Astria, and you can find some others as well. It seems like an interesting space that a lot of people are looking at. But yeah, so what does this enable? First one is cross-chain MEV, which maybe is not a good thing, but because you have this one sequencer ordering these transactions, I, as a sequencer, could give you a guarantee that like this transaction on Arbitrum and this transaction on OP will happen in the same block. Or I can say that, yeah, because they're in the same block, like we can do this cross-chain MEV, different ordering of transactions and stuff. Also easy for simple like roll-up to roll-up bridging, because if I can say that, hey, I made this deposit on Optimism and I made this withdrawal on Arbitrum, and that they're in the same L1 block, easy. Like you can guarantee that, essentially, or the sequencer can guarantee that. And then there's other interoperability benefits, like, I don't know, if you want to pass messages from one network to another network in the same block, you can do that. It's really interesting because normally, if you didn't have this and you have 2 layer 2s, you would maybe have to pass data through L1, so you would have to do that over multiple blocks, or it's a lot more difficult. Or you have a third-party mechanism like CCIP or something. This kind of makes it simpler. And then the other interesting thing that mainly Espresso Systems is working on, I haven't seen any other teams doing this, but sequencing marketplaces. So this is even more into the MEV area, but you can have like bidding for ordering of transactions within multiple rollups. So I can bid that this transaction is ordered before this transaction and whatever across different rollups. And so what this has, a few phases. So we have like a bidding phase. Sequencers can bid on bundles of transactions in this mempool. And then we have an assignment phase. An auction solver proposes that a solution assigns shared sequencers. Sorry, I kind of lost my thought there. But essentially, they propose this this bidding, and then we have a sequencing phase. So the winning sequencers that bid on these bundles will publish them to L1. And we have kind of a diagram of how this works. I might actually open up this link. Actually, it might be hard to do that. But how this looks is we have these sequencers and we have the Espresso Marketplace. So the transactions are coming in, and these sequencers can bid on these different bundles of transactions for multiple rollups. And so if I'm an MEV trader and I see, oh, I can make money on these 3 transactions, I can bid on this. And then we have this network that chooses a sequencer, and the sequencer pushes it to the chains. Like I said, this is mainly for MEV, which I don't know. It depends on if that's a benefit or if it kind of hurts users because they may get sandwich attacked or whatever. But it is an interesting solution to this kind of problem. So we've really sped through this. I expected it to maybe take some more time. But we can go back and look through anything if you guys are curious. If there's any questions that maybe I didn't answer on why this is important or different solutions, can open up to questions.
Which one is your favorite?
Which one is my favorite? I think probably, although I like the idea of a marketplace, like if I was an MEV searcher, like it opens up so much more opportunities and it maybe makes for more efficient markets on layer 2s. Like let's say I could even do a flash loan across layer 2s and fix different inefficiencies in markets. That would be pretty cool to be able to do. However, I think that adoption for a marketplace like this or like a shared sequencer is very difficult, especially when you have these big companies that are running these L2s and they kind of want to do things their own ways. So I would say the most like respectable is probably based rollups, given that they use as much of the L1 as they can, and I would say it's a little more decentralized, a little more trustless than the other solutions, and it doesn't require a whole lot of participation other than possibly nodes running this software, like L1 nodes.
If the adoption is an issue, but isn't there like a couple big L2s already, like planning to have a shared sequencer? So if adoption is a challenge, isn't there already?
Sorry. Hold it. There you go.
So if adoption is a challenge, so isn't there already a couple big L2s planning to have a shared sequencer?
I don't actually know of any that are using it right now or planning to use it. Espresso Systems and Astria are the ones that are building the shared sequencer, but I'm not aware of anybody that is planning to use them at this moment. So in the meantime, like if they don't get there fast enough and Optimism chooses to have their own decentralized sequencer and Arbitrum has their own, it doesn't really make sense to kind of pivot from that and use Espresso Systems and Astria. It makes sense for smaller rollups that just want to use this API and they don't have to build their own sequencer. They can just pop into this one. But for the larger ones at the moment, I think it is tricky.
So maybe I just want to like raise awareness about something else that might be in favor of their base rollups. You can imagine like how, just like to give you some information, like the MEV is one of the strongest pillars of security of L1. And how is that? Because like, for example, in today's Ethereum, we have some block rewards, and on top of that, we have the MEV rewards, which directly goes to validators of L1. Like the builders and searchers find the MEV, capture it, and directly send it to L1 validators. But if in the end game, we assume like the network splits into like thousands of rollups in different places, and each of them has a separate, I don't know, like network and MEV capture, then the L1 validators no longer receive that MEV profit. And even now, right now, the MEV profit easily outweighs the block reward. So what happens, what like the bad event can potentially happen is that the L1 validators will no longer spend their energy, spend their like storage, whatever, whatever resources on L1, and move to become maybe like rollup validators, rollup searchers, whatever.
Yeah.
But with the base sequencing, I think it's much more easier to manage the MEV capturing somehow, so that some portion of the MEV again goes to L1 validators, and so they can stay there. Because otherwise, if they move away from being L1 validator, there is no security on L1, and so it just breaks the whole network of rollups, L2, L3, and whatever.
Yeah. So yeah. So to reiterate, like, if you have a bunch of networks with their own sequencers, and then you have to have these MEV searchers kind of look at each of these, and it fractions it off, and also that doesn't get kicked back to the L1 for those fees, right? Yeah, that is interesting. It makes me think, I wonder if even if you could do like a shared based rollup. Like if you have multiple rollups that are using base rollups and they use the same, or like the next L1 proposer is the one that chooses these sequences, you could have a marketplace on top of that as well, right?
Maybe.
Could be interesting.
Just regarding MEV across some of these different choices, like why, as Ethereum aligned, why would we want to decentralize sequencers when we could just be using base rollups? Kind of along the same lines as what he's talking about, Amir's talking about back there. It just makes so much more sense to keep value accrual and safety, you know, as these things are taking their training wheels off, to keep things settling to mainnet directly.
Yeah, I think the finality is the tricky part there. Like, if you don't have instant or 300 millisecond finality or whatever, if you have 12 seconds or 15 seconds or something, then you lose a bit of the UX there. But yeah. No, it would be interesting too. Like, I think it does make the most sense from a decentralized standpoint to have base rollups. But yeah, I think it's the UX thing that's mainly stopping people. And then the other thing is, like, if you have 20 rollups in the next year, and those all want to use based rollups, but most validators aren't going to be running 20 different like additional software in order to sequence those and submit them, then it might be hard. For larger rollups, like Tycho is quite large, as well as Optimism and Arbitrum, like that would be, I think, pretty easy to get validators on board. But yeah, also I guess it does create more money-making opportunities for them if there's like a roll-up MEV boost kind of thing, you know.
Regarding what you were mentioning about Arbitrum, and when it's, what was it, rolling up into Ethereum, they were only including like 30%. What was that? What was that you can touch base on?
I don't think I mentioned that. I think, Mohammed, did you say that? Or?
Yeah, it was you actually, wasn't it? I didn't quite.
Yeah, I think it was along what Owen was saying right now, that suppose we have 20 base rollups or like many base rollups, it's unreasonable to think that all the proposers are going to run all the execution clients for all those rollups. So you probably end up in a world where only like 30%, 10%, or like some percentage of the proposers are just running each rollups sequencer. Maybe the bigger ones, as the ones get like more support, but the smaller ones have less support. I think like the economic forces of this thing are similar to economic forces of the Ethereum sequencing itself. And that means like we are going to maybe preserve a decentralized set of proposers, but the real block builders are going to be like sophisticated entities who are able to run the nodes for all these rollups and extract the maximum MEV. So I agree that probably more MEV flows towards L1 validators, and maybe that somehow enhances security. I personally don't think like that's really necessary to preserve L1 security, but I agree that more value goes to L1 validators. However, the block building itself is going to be centralized for sure in a world that all the rollups are like based. And maybe there's no escape. Like I don't think there's any other way to like configure things that we don't have centralized block builders. So it's kind of a shortcoming, but on the other hand, it's something that's inevitable.
Yeah. Oh.
I have a question.
Yes.
I still think of post-merge Ethereum being two chains because there's beacon chain, right?
Yes.
Has a different block explorer, has different
Yeah.
header fields. Can we look at, can we see more? Is there more observability with based rollups, given that we can look at the beacon chain? I don't know the answer to this question. I thought maybe you did.
I don't know.
Or would there be? I guess like the based rollups don't exist yet. Or
What do you mean by observability? What do you mean by more observability?
I wanna see based rollup blocks being built and moving through the consensus layer. I wanna see or who is opted in on beacon chain. Like I wanna be able to peek in on it and make sure it's working correctly, given that the rest of them are somewhat off chain.
You could probably see like who was the proposer or whatever, but I don't think you would want to store that data necessarily. 'Cause it's extra data, and maybe that's on the layer 2 data availability layer. Yeah, I don't know.
For a base rollup, since it is like by definition more decentralized, and because the L1 validators are sequencing it, the mempool has to be public. So like you can like you have observability into the transactions that are floating around in the mempool and like what finally gets onto the base rollup block in the end. So maybe you can gain some insights from that.
So if it gets, that's I guess my point.
That's true.
It seems like it's a virtue of that as well.
Yeah.
And then the ones that happen to be if they build at least once, that means that they're opted in, right?
Yeah.
To whatever your rollup is.
Yeah, that's true. You could also kind of do that with like any of these other methods if it's a public mempool, but it wouldn't, of course, be visible on the.
So in the decentralized sequencer case, like there would have to be a public mempool, right?
Yeah.
And also like in terms of what rollups who are planning on decentralized sequences, what they are doing, is it something like you have to stake the native token of that rollup and anybody can get to be a validator on the rollup, or is it like permission in some sense? Like the OP Foundation chooses if you can be a validator or not. Is it permissionless or is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't actually know where OP is on that sense, but I think with Metis it's like permissioned. So. Yes. Yeah, they only have
like you always have to get the blessings of the Dawn.
Yeah, which is like hopefully you
right
can
now
change that. Yes. yeah. And they use what do they use for data availability? They use something else. I can't remember.
with respect to base rollups as well, like you don't need every L1 validator to be on board, like to be running a like the sequencer software locally, because like 90% of the validators are on Ethereum. They like use proposer build receptation. They already offload the block building duties to some entity anyway. So
All right.
so you like at least for like 80 to 90% of the blocks, like if you're not building locally, like the whoever is sequencing the transactions for Ethereum L1, they could do the same for any of the base rollups, and like the base rollup can continue as long as someone is like
Yeah.
and someone in this case would be like any of the builders who are already building Ethereum L1 blocks.
Yeah, that's true.
That's also what I'm trying to get at, is that I find that to be a bit, the builder interactions and performance to be kind of opaque. That's
Mhm.
also what I was trying to get at. Maybe focusing on the beacon chain was wrong, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, but then like, do you really want? That's the big trade-off. It's like, do you really want to roll up that? Oh, I have to wait 15 seconds to know if my transaction actually.
No.
got
I want cheap, and pre-confirmation and all the nice stuff, but
Yeah.
but not if I, am at risk of being, censored
Censored,
or
yeah.
something like this.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you could like sort of like any mechanism that you use to like have censorship resistance on L1, like inclusion lists or whatever you're planning to do on Ethereum L1, you could sort of use the same thing for sequencing based L2 transactions in some sense, to make sure that like you're getting censorship resistance on the L2 as well, maybe, but like yeah, I don't know, like
So like a fallback.
yeah, like a fallback, like if you can have fallbacks for L1 transactions, so maybe you could have that for L2 as well. But that would require the individual validators also running the extra software to have a view of the L2 mempool.
Yeah.
If there's fees to pick up and no one's picking them up,
True.
apparently the incentive, I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
Just to summarize, a different kind of question that maybe can bounce off a few of you guys is, why are they going to start decentralizing their sequencers? I mean, we hear a lot about it. They're making a lot, like a chain, or excuse me, a roll-up like Base is making about 200 million a year, and what I think Justin Drake referred to as congestion fees. They're not actually sequencer fees.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite dig into why congestion fees are still going to remain even if they're decentralizing the sequencer, but I believe that is the premise behind it.
Well, I think you could still like bid up your transactions with a decentralized sequencer. Yeah, I don't know. I up until recently I didn't realize that sequencers made a lot of money as well. And just from what you're describing with like
Not
congestion.
100% this is true, but like I read somewhere that basically Base has like a similar EIP 1559 sort of mechanism for inclusion of transactions, but instead of burning the base fee, they send it to a Coinbase address. So irrespective of whether you're like making any money off MEV for doing the sequencing, Coinbase is still making money by just collecting all the base fees as well. So like the more activity you get on Base, you sort of have incoming revenue regardless of that. So it's not accruing to the holders of the base token in any sense. It's like just going to Coinbase.
Yeah. Which, yeah, why would they decentralize? If for Base, I don't think you would, which is kind of too bad. Also, like, they want that speed, right? I don't know if you guys have tested it out, but down the street there's Revolver Coffee. If you're buying a coffee, they support Base. If you're buying a coffee, you don't want to wait that time in order for your transactions to get included. If they have a centralized sequencer, they can do pre-confs. They can say, okay, yep, went through. So yeah, I think like, why would they want to be decentralized? I don't know. I would hope that that they have
A
this in
possible
mind.
way I could see this playing out is that rollups like Arbitrum or Optimism, well, I guess Optimism is based in some sort of ways, but Tycho perhaps, if we do see different kinds of administration down in the USA, if they start, layer 2 saying we're going to start sharing our sequencer fees with token holders,
Yeah.
like the value can accrue to the token holders as opposed to we're just giving it to Coinbase.
Yeah.
So like, why do we want to play on Coinbase so much when it's like all these other potential layer 2 will decentralize and we can actually, have tokens that get returned to community as opposed to just making one entity super fucking rich?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you're a stockholder, and then it's probably a pretty good thing.
Oh yeah, coins.
Yeah,
nice.
coin stock's not too bad. So.
I think for Base, it's mostly like they were initiated inside Coinbase, so like they have a lot more regulation to deal with that a lot of these other entities don't. And a lot of like the L2s that sort of start off like Optimism will like try to be as decentralized as possible, even like during its creation. So I don't think they might have the same utility on an L2, but I don't think like regulation looks at it the same way. So that's one part. And I also think like for Base, it's mostly like their marketing team and like their access to their users, and like developers really just want users more than anything. So they had this like integration with the Coinbase wallet and all of that, which is really why developers choose to build on Base.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just have one quip there. Is that if it's a truly permissionless system, I can go in and build a walled garden if I want to, but no one has to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, incentive to decentralize might be because of regulatory reasons as well, right? Maybe if we have a centralized sequencer, it can get shut down easily, but if we have a spread out sequencer, it's not that easy to shut down everything. That could be one potential reason want to use.
Yeah. I think also another thing that could, like, another route is keeping a centralized sequencer and having a better backup plan for, like, submitting your own transactions. Like, maybe it's more expensive to submit your own transaction, then you don't have to, like, wait for the sequencer to stop for 5 days or whatever it is. It would be great if there was, like, some way to include your transaction alongside the sequencer. However, that is definitely a difficult problem to figure out. I feel like that's maybe the ideal way, because like if you're Coinbase, like of course you want fast, you want to have a majority of the users use it, but if you have that extra backup plan that's like, oh, if the special person that wants this privacy or non-censorship, they can use this kind of alternative route. I don't know what that solution looks like, but that would probably be the ideal one in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to add a few things.
Yeah.
First is I guess like the most important like concrete motivation for decentralization is liveness guarantees. Like it could be because of regulatory reasons, or it could be because like if one entity is maintaining all the sequencers, what if like a rogue employee turns everything down, or like they get hacked or whatever. So for stronger liveness guarantees, there is a motivation to decentralize. I'm sure like many of the rollup teams are very seriously looking into this, and like I don't buy the voices that say like rollups are making a lot of money, they will never decentralize. Like, because if you look at things more carefully, especially for rollups that can issue a token, Base might be a special case, because like they may never issue a token because they don't want to deal with I don't know, US regulatory. But others who will issue a token or already have a token,
they could play another game, like a game of value, actual to token, and they have a big treasury of the token, and like get access to the same, get exposure to the same revenue, or even like better, like more, because there's anticipation of this revenue going higher and having growth and so on. So it's not like that there is no motivation for L2s to decentralize, because they can capitalize on the fees with their token and like their share of the tokens. So I guess like the main reason they don't decentralize, they have not decentralized yet, like for instance, Optimism super chains have not decentralized yet, or like for instance, Escrow has not decentralized yet, is like when you decentralize, upgrading becomes extremely more complicated. So that's the main reason. And like many of these rollups are still rolling out upgrades on a regular basis. Arbitrum had like this stylus thing a few days ago. Scroll has been launching upgrades every 2 months almost, like, and they are doing like significant changes. So that's the main thing. And besides that, especially ZK rollups, if you decentralize sequencer, you need to decentralize prover, and that's fairly more complicated. And there are like decentralized prover networks and so on that are coming up, but they are still like very young and early. And the main reason, for instance, for ZK proofs to be more complicated to decentralize is many of these ZK proofs of, for instance, on Scroll, when you have a batch of transactions that goes on L1, you don't have a monolithic proof for the whole batch. You have smaller proofs for like smaller chunks, and then you have aggregated proofs, and then you have aggregated proofs of aggregated proofs. And usually there is a big cluster of provers that do this. And it's if we decentralize this, there are going to be really a small number of entities that can do the whole thing. So the right way to decentralize this is to decentralize it in a way that the atomic unit of proof generation is smaller than the whole, like, then the coordination and everything become a mess. Like people can play dirty games in like timing their proof, like publication and like causing others harm, stuff like that. So I feel like it may see like easy at gallons, but especially because of the upgradability, and for ZK rollups because of like decentralized proof generation, things are a bit more complicated. And I feel like the incentives are there, especially if you think about they can capitalize on the same revenue. Like you could tomorrow, if it was easy, and say % of the fees are go to a vault, buy back like the L2's token, whatever, and I 50% of the token. Yoo-hoo! Like I still have exposure to revenue.
Yeah.
So yeah, hope we get the centralized sequence here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be pretty cool to see. Cool. I think we can. Oh, we got one more question. Hold it. It's not on. Cool.
All right. Now when we're done with the discussion about the sequencer, what do you think about the layer 2 landscape in general? Do you think we're gonna have like 20 layer 2s in 5 years from now, or just 2, or what's
I
going
don't
to
know.
happen?
It would kind of suck to have 20. But then again, if you have like a shared sequencer where you can do super easy cross swaps and everything, then maybe it doesn't matter as much. Yeah, I don't know. From a UX perspective, it would be great to have just a few. Also, like, if all these L2s have a different like data availability layer and different parts of their stack are different, everybody kind of has to have a better understanding of how they work in order to know what the trust assumptions are and like why this is better, why this is decentralized. So kind of a lot of that makes it more complicated and not easy for a user to just hop in and I know this is decentralized and this is why, and okay, I can use it. I feel like there probably will be a ton of L2s maybe in the next year or 2 years, because oh, you have a new L2. Okay, everybody goes, oh, somebody's got to build the DEX. Somebody's got to build the lending protocol. Somebody's got to build whatever. And it's a cycle of, oh, okay, there's money to be made here. And then it will probably burn out. And when that ends, I don't know. It's kind of like a DeFi 3.0 or whatever, where there's just a lot of playing around with new L2s. But I don't think that will last, because it doesn't make sense unless somebody is able to prove their worth. So I think long term, we have a couple L2s, or maybe app super chains like OP stack, where you have maybe a bunch of different applications that have different OP stacks, or they're using the OP stack, but you have this kind of super chain architecture. That could maybe be a solution, but right now, I don't really know. We'll see how it plays out.
At least the decentralized sequencer doesn't make sense if there's only two like big ones.
True, I think
left.
base
But it
rollups
could make
probably
sense
makes more
like
sense.
if base gets very big, and then like 2 or 3 of the others then unite to go to do the same decentralized sequencer, and then they would do the transactions between them,
Yeah.
between those layer 2s faster and cheaper.
Yeah.
Then people would be incentivized to use base, because if you use base, you're not gonna get cheap access to those other users.
That's true. Yeah. If you have just like a small set, like let's say 5, and they're all using shared sequencer, then that does make sense. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. That's okay.
So I apologize. The question is probably going to be pretty basic, but
Yeah.
I study political science, and I guess one of the questions I had is, what's kind of the concern with a centralized system? I guess in terms of this. In terms of this.
Yeah, or even just in general, that's okay. Yeah, I think the main thing is censorship resistance, and also availability. So security. So let's say I want to submit something that a big entity does not want me to submit. My bank doesn't want me to send $10,000 through e-transfer because, oh no, you're only allowed to send 2,500 or whatever. I think a big concern is that a lot of people want that freedom, and that's a big thing for that censorship resistance. And then also security. Like let's say we're talking Coinbase runs their sequencer. If they get hacked, everybody's kind of screwed to some extent. If it's a decentralized network, it's much more difficult to hack that. You need a lot more like economic incentive and stuff. So that would be my answer, is like security and censorship resistance, and then also downtime. So even if Coinbase didn't get hacked, but their sequencer went down because AWS or the server went down, then nobody can use that chain. Like what happened, I think, last year with Rogers, the network went down. Nobody could tap Visa. Like all of the tap machines were just down. With a more decentralized network, you don't really get that as much.
And sorry, just to follow up, would you be able to provide, I guess, like a few examples of like what I guess would be kind of like transactions that generally aren't, I guess, allowed by the larger corporations or whichever, and then why the larger corporations or whoever it is would be resist and also censor those?
Yeah, so a lot of corporations or like banks will kind of use the argument that customers will shoot themselves in the foot. If I sent you a $10,000 transaction and I didn't mean to, then I kind of screwed myself over if it's irreversible, which a lot of crypto transactions are. So there is that aspect of it. However, I would say that it kind of makes more sense for that user to choose that. Maybe I can have a crypto wallet that I say, oh, okay, I don't want to be able to send transactions larger than that for my security. But people should be able to have that choice to kind of use their money as they wish. Another thing which I believe, regardless of your political stance, is with kind of the trucker situation that happened a few years ago, is where these people lost access to all of their funds kind of overnight because of a political decision, which is very harmful. Depends on how you think about that situation, but it can be applied to different situations where, like, let's say this was a argument used by Sam Bankman-Fried a little while ago, but let's say I wanted to send money to somebody in Iran to buy a bagel. I cannot do that because I can't send any money to somebody in Iran for political reasons. Should you be able to? Is a question that I think a lot of people, well, depending on who you ask, would say yes or no. You shouldn't be able to supply money to Iran for weapons or whatever. But it's a big discussion that's kind of a lot of people have talked about that. I believe a lot of people in this room would say that you should have full freedom over your finances. So, yeah.
And I guess
There's a very strong correlation between regimes that go bad and then stop, specifically prevent people from taking money out of the country by controlling the banking system.
Yes. Like with Russia recently, right? You couldn't.
Russia, China has restrictions, 50K a year. I think like Azerbaijan, lots of East Asian countries have restrictions. You're not allowed to take money out of the country.
Like recently, Mercury Bank like blocked a few founder accounts that were, you know, living in certain countries. I think inclusive of Ukraine and a few other places. But also like outside just the payment layer, there's also like, you know, decentralized social networks. And like, if you use any of the platforms today, you're inevitably going to land up in this like, you know, bottleneck where you have to pay more to participate more. And if you have like these sort of decentralized social networks like Farcaster or Lens, you have a lot more optionality to reach your customers. So not payment specific, but you know, once you have distribution, you have access to reach your customers.
Yeah.
Like there's a really stupid example, but the other day I had to fix my car and my bank put a limit on how much I could spend on my debit card. So I had to split it into 5 different payments. So it was like $1,000. But my bank said I could not spend $1,000. So I did first a transaction for 500. Then I tried again and that failed. So then I had to try for 200. That worked. Then I tried again and that failed because my bank's just like limiting my use. And then I had to just split it in like progressively smaller like transactions, which is just retarded. Like, why is the bank kind of controlling how I spend my money, or why I spend it?
I had the same thing happen. I think I was sending like 18K for something, and like I had to send it individually in like 1 to 2K, and just wait there for like 20 minutes, and then keep calling the bank, and they were like, "Oh, we fixed it," and then and it wouldn't work again, and it was just like, you know, it was a half an hour transaction.
Or probably, I think the biggest realization for a lot of people, if you ever have to transfer funds to somebody in another country, if you use crypto, you can do that instantly. There's no questions. It will take a few seconds. If you do that through a bank, it will take a few weeks, and you'll get a lot of questions.
This applies for countries that have oppressing regimes like Canada and US, where it's really hard to transfer money internationally.
Yes.
While in Europe, it's super easy.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, it's easier, but it's like you still pay quite a bit of fees.
Well, for changing the currency, but if you do euro transactions between
even like a euro transfer, you pay more fees than you would if you just transfer like USDC on Arbitrum.
No.
A few cents?
Well, most private person euro transactions are completely free, and with PSD2 they are also instant.
Okay. Yeah.
They do have a limit on like the amount of money you're allowed to send, though. Yeah. No.
But North America definitely have like all this.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
Yeah.
not
it's
saying
a fully
North
credit
America
card
is crazy,
system,
but
yeah.
like Europe has a limit of how much you can spend, and like they put a limit on how much you can spend in cash without KYC, which is another retarded thing. Like, yeah, you have to KYC if you want to pay for something with more than 500 euros. Like that. Okay, that definitely makes sense. Yeah.
In a meaningful way. Like the best way out is to build systems like information dispersal systems, social systems that are fundamentally decentralized and fundamentally resistant to censorship, so that people can exert their free will and do whatever they want. This includes a specific social tool called money, but also other stuff like just messaging or broadcasting stuff. It has it's a two-sided thing. Like for instance, ISIS can go publish an announcement on Ethereum as an Ethereum transaction, or if we have very nice data availability layers, some crazy dude can publish child pornography on Celestial or whatever, which is obviously bad. But which one is worse? Like people being able to abuse this system occasionally, or like governments being able to systematically choke the societies because like they want to or something. So I think that the first thing is more acceptable to me than the latter, and that's like the general sentiment in this community.
So this was the answers because you said your political science background. But if you would say your economics background, and everyone would be telling you that banks are huge monopolies, there's no new banks for a very long time. And like having a decentralized system also like creates the market circumstances that much easier for new people or like new companies or new operators to start running their nodes and participating, which we will drive down.
Yes. Except for in the EU. But yes, it's a lot of kind of giving more power to the people, I think. We can wrap it up there and kind of continue discussion off the stream. But thank you guys. I hope you kind of learned something a little bit. And if you want to see any of the slides, they're on this QR code. It's just a link to these slides. So, yeah, thanks.